the last few weeks, we've had a number of guest speakers, and I was trying to figure out a topic for today. And starting out with Philip Moffat and his day-long, and Jennifer Carson, it seemed to be that they were talking about taking the practice off the cushion, taking the meditative awareness that we can acquire through meditation and taking it into our daily lives. Philip talked about the paramis of patience and persistence and developing those in our lives. Jennifer Carson talked about going beyond just bare attention, cultivating the ability to see things as they are, as they arise. Talked about working more with the ethical conduct in an appropriate manner. And how do you pronounce the last name? Is it Puracello? I guess that's what it was. She spoke about conducting our lives using the middle way, trying to find a middle ground between two extremes. All of these had the theme of taking the practice off the cushion and into our lives. Then Wendy talked about the gifts of practice, deepening our practice. So what came up for me was the Buddhist notion of bhavana, which means cultivation. Cultivation both on the cushion and cultivation, once again, in our lives. And the image of bhavana in Buddhist times was a farmer cultivating a field. First, they put out the seeds and they take care of it over a whole season, and finally the field would bear fruit. So if you keep that image in mind of bhavana, that's what the Buddha was talking about. And specifically, he talked about developing 4 mind states, the Brahmaviharas. And the Brahmaviharas are mettā, loving kindness, which we're all familiar with, karuṇā, which is compassion, muditā, sympathetic joy for the happiness and welfare of others, and upekkhā, equanimity. He called these the Four Brahmaviharas, or Divine Abodes. And supposedly the story goes, and I really kind of like this story, a group of monks was heading out for a 3-month retreat in the woods of the jungle, which was typical in the Buddhist time. It was called the Rains Retreat because the roads were impassable during the rainy season, and it was the time that the Buddhist monks would go somewhere on a 3-month retreat. And the monks came running down to the Buddha and said, the tree spirits, they're angry with us and are causing us all kinds of trouble. We're afraid of them. And the Buddha said, okay, I'm going to teach you mettā, the metta phrases, and I want you to use these metta phrases for yourself and also for these tree spirits. And this will absolve you of your fear and then calm the tree spirits down. So the monks went ahead and did that, and apparently the tree spirits really liked it. And from that point on, they welcomed the monks into their forest and appreciated the metta that was being projected towards them. So I really like that story. I think it's kind of nice. So the Brahma means, what was a Sanskrit term? It means the Godhead in that time. So the highest realm. And vihara meant abode or a home or a place, where the mind could feel most at home, and where you could aspire to and have a resting place. So the idea with the Brahmaviharas, at least for us now, would be developing our minds so that we would rest in these abodes. They're considered to be boundless because there's no limitation. So I think when I was going through this, well, where is my mind usually? Where does my mind usually rest? I can train my mind in meditation. I can develop a concentration, and it feels really good. Or I can develop bare attention. But when I'm out in the world, where does my mind really rest? Or where have I developed my mind? Where does my mind incline? And when I looked at that, yes, I have states of anxiety, yes, I have states of this, yes, states of this. But I think through practice, the one that I've developed the most was this notion of equanimity. My mind tends to incline towards equanimity. And I'll explain that a little bit more as I go along. But it'd be good kind of during this talk, where does your mind incline regularly? I mean, when you are, say you're driving your car or you're at the grocery store, obviously there's different mind states that arise and pass, but a lot of times we sort of have a default. And it's good to kind of look at that a little bit, I think. So the first of the Brahmaviharas is the one probably we're most familiar with, and that would be mettā, loving kindness. We always end our Sunday sits and our Wednesday sits with a short metta chant. Soft affection and care for others and yourself. It has the quality of non-attachment to it. And then the Buddha talked about the near enemies and the far enemies of these Brahmaviharas. So the near enemy of metta would be selfish affection. I'll give you this loving energy as long as you give it back to me, right? And if you don't give it back to me, then I'm not about ready to give mine out to you. So that would be the near enemy of metta. Far enemy of metta, ill will, hatred, right? Would be the opposite of loving kindness. Okay. Second of the Brahmaviharas, karuṇā or compassion. An open heart that cares for everyone and everything, or attempts to. Being empathetic to others. How is another person feeling? Near enemy of karuṇā would be pity. Feeling sorry for someone, they're in a different position than you are. Compassion would say that we're all in this together, and if someone is suffering, you feel their suffering because tomorrow it could happen to you, right? Pity would be someone is beneath you and therefore they're suffering and you feel sorry for them. That would be the near enemy of karuṇā or compassion. Far enemy would be cruelty, being cruel. Third of the Brahmaviharas, muditā, sympathetic joy for the welfare and happiness of others. Delight in other people's accomplishments. I came across this at Mickey's house. We were doing one of our Wednesday night groups, and somehow this came up in one of our books. And I took the idea of muditā out, and I kind of projected out, and I came across one family that I got to know through my daughter's, I think, soccer team, and they seemed to do everything right. They had wealth, they had beautiful children. I said, well, I am feeling a little bit of envy here, a little bit of envy. They had property on private surfing property up in Northern California. I thought, oh, man, these guys have it made. And then I started examining, but they were really good people. They were always volunteering. They were always helping out. They were involved in the schools. And so I worked with that for a long time. And it was interesting that I began to feel muditā instead of envy. And that was kind of of all of these, that was very much of a turning point for me. Because then I look back at myself, and I have a lot. I'm not someone who really lacks in the material sense, or I have a family. I have a lot myself. I don't know if I'm explaining this properly or not, but it was just a notion that I had enough and that I didn't need to envy somebody else's things, their accomplishments, or who they were. And that was really an interesting turning point for me, because my default position was to envy other people and their things and their possessions and who they were and where they were in life. And it really turned out that it was okay just to appreciate what they have and to appreciate what I have. And it was enough. And it was it was that ease, I think, the Buddha was talking about in these abodes. it was much less suffering involved with that. Far enemy of muditā would be that jealousy or resentment that I was speaking to. The last of the four divine abodes, Brahmaviharas, upekkhā, or equanimity. Balanced state of mind to what is arising in the experience. A lot of times it's easy to connote this with calm, and certainly being calm is a great thing, highly recommended. But equanimity is being able to be present with what is occurring in your experience in a non-reactive way. So oftentimes we're not calm. Oftentimes we have to sort of act in situations appropriately, and it's not always calm. I know Nicholas in here involved in education. He's a substitute teacher, and oftentimes we are in a situation where it's not particularly calm, but we have to act appropriately. And this Brahmavihara equanimity is very, very helpful in this particular myth. So the near enemy of equanimity would be indifference, not caring of what is occurring. And the far enemy would be craving and clinging, right? Craving and clinging to experience, reacting to experience. Anybody have any questions? Anything I'm talking about? I sometimes do better if people ask me questions.
Yeah, I was listening to you. Did I miss about the near enemy of muditā?
Near enemy of muditā. Indifferent muditā. Okay, no, I didn't say it.
Okay.
Exuberance, which I looked up on the, because I didn't quite know what exuberance meant. So I looked it up on the internet. Over-enthusiasm. Over-enthusiasm, yeah. Okay, so that would be the near enemy. Anybody else have any questions? So, how do you work with these? Well, I was looking on the internet, and lo and behold, the best way of working this came up was Philip Moffitt on his site, Dharma Wisdom, which has a lot of good stuff on it for those that were here for the all day with him. It's a very good website, very nicely designed, very user friendly. At the top of the page on the Brahmaviharas on his webpage, he has this quote: "When the mind is not clinging, it dwells in the four heavenly abodes." So for mettā, notice when you're feeling in a state of mettā, a friendly state. Perhaps he talked about being in nature, or you've done a generous act, or your mind is inclining towards mettā. And then he says, you can take that and begin to develop it, both internally and externally. If you generate it, say you're walking down the street and you are mindful and you're feeling mettā, you could send it to a stranger. And in this way, you begin to develop that quality. Once again, I find the grocery store to be a great place for this. All of these, actually. I often, when I leave here on Sundays, there's a Ralph's on 4th Street. I don't know if you're familiar with it. And it can be a crazy place. But I really enjoy going in there because you do come across all kinds of people, and poor Wendy's judgmental mind half-day. Actually, I did notice that there was a lot of judging going on when I was in there. It was not, and then I came across just the notion that all these people were there for one reason. They're getting food, right? Which is a pretty darn basic reason. And so, anyway, it was just interesting. So it's a nice place to practice the Brahmaviharas. Also, other things go on. There's all the colors, so it's pleasurable. The food is pleasurable. The crowds are not pleasurable. And then, I mean, just there's a million things going on, and it's fun to go in there after I do the Sunday sit. But anyway, so sending that out to other people is a great thing to do. Great way to practice mettā. Karuṇā, or compassion. Do you have compassion for others? Or do you have compassion for yourself? Who are you harder on, yourself or others? It's one of his suggestions to sort of look inside and kind of see which one you are the most non-compassionate about, or which one you have the most compassion for. Can you be accountable for your unskillful actions and maintain compassion? I thought that was an interesting one to ponder. Do you have enough compassion for yourself that your unskillful actions, that you still keep yourself in your own heart? Muditā, sympathetic joy. He says this is the most difficult one to develop. How do you respond to others' happiness or success? Do you have envy or jealousy? When you look at others, do you feel yourself lacking in some way? It's an interesting thought. I think I explored that a little bit earlier. Upekkhā, equanimity. Calmness is a good quality, but equanimity is not calmness. Equanimity means being able to stay with all states that arise. Anger, anxiety, fear, all states. Notice when equanimity is present, on and off the cushion. And then he emphasizes patient development of these. So that's that bhavana quality again. That taking some of this off the cushion and beginning to apply it. Any questions? So I'm going to move on. Rick Hansen, is anybody familiar with him? He is correct me if I'm wrong, neurobiologist? Neuropsychologist. And he also is a Buddhist practitioner in the same tradition that we are. So he's sort of bridging the how do I say this? The two different fields, neuropsychology and Buddhism. He's one of the main people that's bridging the two. And his famous phrase, although I found out it wasn't his phrase, but it's one that he has popularized. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Meaning that how you incline your mind, your neurons firing, is how you're going to habituate the mind, that mind will incline that direction in the future. If you incline your mind towards anger all the time, guess what? The mind's going to be angry all the time. You incline your mind towards the Divine Abodes, guess what? The mind is going to spend more time in those Divine Abodes. He's developed a couple of good books on it. I didn't really have time to develop too much about it, but the latest one, Hardwired for Happiness, which I've read a little bit of, I haven't finished yet. And then the more famous one is Buddha's Brain, it's called, where these two books, he explores this parallel between neuropsychology and Buddhist thought. If you have a chance, good books. Also, he's got a lot of talks out there on the web if you're interested in doing some of that. And one of the things that he said, because he is involved in both communities, he knows a lot of people that have meditated for decades and are just darn hard people to be around. They're not nice people. they may have developed bare attention, they may have developed deep insight into, say, the 3 characteristics, and dukkha, anatta, impermanence, no self, and suffering, but they haven't developed the Brahmaviharas in this discussion. So he says they've only gotten part of the picture. In his opinion, they've only gotten part of the picture. And at the full development, you need to take these ideas and change the way your brain is inclining itself. I found that very fascinating, very, very fascinating to think about in those terms. That's why kind of at the beginning of the talk, I said, it's good to think about, where does your mind incline? Where does your mind, when you're off the cushion, say you're in your car or wherever, where does your mind incline, right? The holiday season, I spent some time with my family, and I love them all, but their mind inclines in certain directions. And it was interesting. I was pretty centered through the whole process, and I'm not working right now, so I have a little more time. I made a point of sitting every day fairly well, and just to kind of sit in the midst of all that, the minds were definitely inclining in directions that I'm very familiar with because they're my family and I grew up with them, but they suffer. Some of them suffer. No, I mean, not badly. It's just you just see it, right? And hard to tell your family what to do. They don't like to listen to me, certainly, but it was interesting to see all of that. So anyway, some thoughts from Rick Hansen. Yes?
So Brad, I have a question on your use of word incline. So incline connotes involuntary, but are you saying that you can voluntarily choose how to incline your mind?
You can train your mind. I think that's what I'm saying. Incline means if, say, you weren't being mindful, where would your mind go?
So are you talking about tendencies?
Tendencies, exactly. I'm sorry, I should have made that more clear. Thank you. The tendency of the mind to go in one direction. Some people's tendency is to anger. All kinds. Our minds tend to be very mechanical and very habituated to certain thought patterns. Does that make sense? Now, meditation, through bare attention and meditation, become aware of those, right? But what the Brahmaviharas, what Buddha is saying, the Brahmaviharas, as far as my understanding, which may be limited, I'm only a substitute teacher here, is the idea, and what Rick Hansen is saying, is that you can train the mind to spend more time in the Divine Abodes, in the Brahmaviharas.
So what you're saying is recognize how your mind inclines, and then if it's insufficient or leads you to suffering, work on inclining and catching that before it actually happens and going in another direction.
That sounds good. Yeah, I mean, yes. There's that RAIN acronym they talk about. You recognize something as it comes up, and you don't push it away. You accept the fact that it is in your experience. Say it's anger. You recognize that you're angry, and you accept the fact that you are angry. I'm not angry, damn it, and push it away, right? And then you investigate that, and then non-attachment, then to move on. So that'd be sort of the equanimity part of that. I've heard that used quite a bit. Here with the Brahmaviharas, they probably come up in your experience. Equanimity comes up in our experience. Compassion comes up in our experience. Happiness for others. One thing I came across was just seeing a child grow up. There's some joy for that, right? Sympathetic joy. You're not really attached to that. You see them moving through their. So that comes up, and recognizing that, and you're experiencing it and enlarging it, letting those experiences grow, positive experiences grow. I did a week-long mettā retreat. I guess by all accounts, I was a miserable failure. But as much as you're talking about, there's a repeating the phrases over and over. No, I'm not thinking it was a miserable failure. It did incline my mind much more towards mettā, and how I wasn't all that, has been pointed out to be by more than one person in the song, to hear all that loving mettā kindness. That wasn't my strong point. So I did point that out to me. But it was a very wonderful retreat in that regard. There was that feeling tone. So I guess what I'm saying, there's the practice of, say, the car practice, or there's also a more formal type of practice for these Brahmaviharas. There's sets of phrases. We do the set of phrases for at the end with the mettā, but there's also sets of phrases for each one of these Brahmaviharas. Sort of the queen of all this is Sharon Salzberg. I don't know if anybody's familiar with her work. She's mostly on the East Coast at Insight Meditation Society. And her book, LovingKindness, The Revolutionary Art of Happiness, has all this in detail, and exercises to do and phrases to say and things like that. I guess the point, once again, we probably all experience these. We have kind of a story about who we are, and we're oh, I'm this kind of person, or I'm this kind of person. But it'd be good to look into your experience in the future and perhaps in the past. You have moments of these, right? So that means you're not just this way or that way. That's the ego story of who you are, right? And we're already some parts of these and some of these, and the idea is to develop. What the Buddha is saying, develop these parts, these divine abodes. They're worth developing, worth spending time with. When you're in them, the hindrances tend to be at bay. I wrote down the hindrances somewhere, yes. Sloth and torpor, restlessness, doubt, desire, and aversion. Not necessarily in that order. Those are the hindrances that most of us, that are the classic reasons why the mind won't settle in meditation. Is one way to look at it, right? When you're in one of these divine abodes, those hindrances, at least for that time period, are off to the side, and the mind can rest in the abode. That's one of the things about these that is nice too. So that's something to look at as well. The breath, having a compassionate relationship with yourself, in this case your breath, or the phrase that I learned many years ago, having tea with your demons. Oh, here's anger, or let's just sit down here and let's talk about it, right? So that's sort of that compassionate attitude to what's going on internally with you, rather than pushing it away, or this shouldn't be here, or I should. It's just, okay, here you come again, sit down. I guess with the Buddha, he was challenged by Mara on the night of his enlightenment, which you can take that many ways, but you could say that was some form of hindrance, or something that was telling him he wasn't good enough to experience the awakening he had. And I know Wendy has some problems with this story, but he said, Mara says, what right do you have to be enlightened, like awakened like this? And he put his hand down on the earth and said, the earth is my witness. So Mara went away. But another part of that story is, all through the teachings, Mara came back. Even though he was this fully awakened one, Mara was there with him all the time. And he's, hello Mara, how are you? Do you have seats? I got some work to do, we'll talk about it later. I mean, literally, it was kind of the way the sutras talk about it, right? And this is 30 years into his teachings, so it's going to be there. Yeah. Well, I guess it's only a bummer if you have a model of what the way things should be, in a sense, or what it would mean to be awakened. Does it mean you're just this perfect individual with no problems, or supernatural powers, or whatever, like Superman flying around the sky or something? Or is it just you're awakened to who you are, right? So I don't know. I don't talk about things I don't really have an understanding of, but I was going to see 2 more things. How's that? two more short things. This is from the Buddha. The thought manifests as the word manifests as the deed develops into habit, and habit hardens into character.
Can you say that again?
Yeah. The thought manifests as the word manifests as the deed develops into habit, and habit hardens into character. Character, right? Okay. So watch the thought and its ways with care, and let it spring from love, born out of concern for all beings. So, I thought that was good. And then, this is a story from about 250 years after the Buddha's time. So it'd be about 250 before the Common Era. There was a king in India, King Ashoka. I don't know if you're familiar with this story or not. And he was a great warrior, and in those days, he who had the most kingdoms won, right? So he went to battle against the kingdom next to him, the Kalingas, the Kalinga family. And so he won the battle, and he went out to see the battlefield, and it was just strewn with corpses. You know, and in those days, you know, they fought hand-to-hand combat, and the birds were out there doing their thing, and he was appalled because he had brought this on, right? He was the aggressor, and he had brought this terrible carnage on. And as he was feeling this appalling emotion in him, he looked out, and here comes a Buddhist monk, walking through the field, chanting, really in these divine abodes, right? The monk was in the divine abodes, showing a lot of equanimity, very at peace with himself. And of course, you've got two extremes, right? You've got this horrible battle, and this king is feeling that it's his fault. He's carrying the weight of this, and here comes this being that's free and loving. And so at that point, as the story goes, he converted to Buddhism, Ashoka did, and stopped fighting, stopped the soldiering, was very benevolent to his people and to the people he had conquered. And then his son and daughter took these teachings, the Theravadan teachings that we most of the time spend in Bhammi's meditation, to Sri Lanka. And then where they were preserved on Sri Lanka, Buddhism in India died out for a variety of reasons, but the teachings that were taken to Sri Lanka spread to Burma and all over Southeast Asia, and to us in the United States. Here we are today. So I guess the point of the story is that we don't just do these trainings for just ourselves, right? And we don't really know the effect we're having on others by what we do to help ourselves. And in this case, this one monk, sort of minding his own business, changed the course of history in some regards. So you never know what the fruits of your actions and your trainings are going to be.